I spent 6 months studying George Miller, the director behind the Mad Max franchise, and it completely changed my perspective on the audience's role in your art. Here's what I learned. If you're putting your art into the world, you're doing so with the expectation that people will consume it. Saying you're making your art for yourself and that you don't care if people see it is just a defense mechanism for when they inevitably don't. Setting out with the intention of not making something for an audience is just setting out with the intention of making something that no one wants to see. The reason we tell stories is to share our unique perspective of the world with others. The act of telling a story itself requires there to be someone to tell it to. In order for a story to be shared, there must be an audience to receive it.
Everything has a narrative, but the key to it is that it needs an audience, it needs an observer. There is no story without somebody to observe it.
To truly know what you've made, you must share it with the world. You can think you've written the funniest joke ever, but you won't know for sure until you're telling it in front of a group of strangers. Your subjective opinion about your art is not the truth. After editing the first Mad Max, George Miller thought that it was terrible, but despite his feelings towards the film, it went on to become one of the most influential movies ever made. Not to mention one of the most successful at the box office. You might be able to deceive yourself about what it is that you've made, but the audience is incapable of lying to you. You don't know what you have until they tell you so.
If you do it properly, you're putting all of yourself into it. Everything you know and whatever wisdoms and skills you might have accumulated along the way. But you don't really know how it's going to impact. And it usually takes time. After a while, the audience starts to tell you what your film is.
Just because you're making things for an audience does not mean that they should dictate what it is that you create. The moment you start making things solely to get something from others is the moment you stop being an artist and you start being a con man, doing whatever you have to manipulate people's emotions so you can get what you want.
Did you think of this as a feminist story when you were writing it?
Not overtly. I was very interested in the character. The sense that she was somehow a very, really interesting action hero, female, just arose organically out of the story. The feminist notions of the movie were the same. It was never, the first agenda of the film. It was always story-driven, and the rest followed.
If the purpose of art is to share your point of view with the world, then the impetus for your art needs to start with you and not the world. The audience should never be the reason you make something. You should create things because you want to create them. The driving force should be you have an idea you feel so strongly about that you have no other option than to make it exist. But if the goal is for other people to consume your work, you need to make sure you're presenting your ideas in such a way that they are actually able to consume them. Your responsibility as an artist is not only what you share, but how you share it. In his book Linchpin, Seth Godin wrote that deciding what to leave out and what to insist on is part of your art. One author I know is willing to watch his books sit unsold because that's a better outcome to him than changing the essence of what he's written. He has passion for his craft, but no real passion for spreading his ideas. And if the ideas don't spread, if no gift is received, then there is no art, only effort. The audience should not guide your creation, but they should influence your revisions. There are infinite ways to get your point across, and it is arrogant to think that the one way you've stumbled upon is the most effective. You want to get feedback from outside perspectives before releasing your art into the world to make sure that it actually has resonance and that you're not deceiving yourself. You're not looking to change what you're saying, but rather how you're saying it. This does not take away from you as an artist. How you choose to intake feedback and make revisions are artistic decisions that only you can make. The audience might be able to tell you where your art is broken, but they cannot tell you how to fix it.
I am not a huge advocate of the concept of concept testing, but user testing is brilliant, right?
Yeah.
The idea of like, did you have fun? If you didn't have fun, why didn't you have fun? Why were you confused at this? Did you not know where to go? You know, the sort of visceral reaction versus, do you like red or blue, right? Like, that's useless in my opinion. Like, it doesn't mean that I don't trust other people's opinions. It's just that when you do that, all you do is just sort of get that subjective opinion, and you're not really following the vision that you want. But the objective, like, is what we're doing enjoyable? goal.
Yeah.
Right? And I think anybody who forgets that, you end up making a game that you're surprised. Why doesn't anybody like this? It's like, because I don't think maybe you let anybody in. You didn't let them in to say, this wasn't fun, and this is why it wasn't fun. Even if it's a deeply held belief, you're like, I must do it this way. There are times when you're just wrong.
The work is not done when the art is finished. If your responsibility is to present your ideas in such a way that others can receive them, then it is also your responsibility to make sure that they actually receive them. Promoting your work is still a part of the process and needs to be treated with the same level of respect that you give everything else. In today's oversaturated world, the best work does not rise to the top on its own. It needs a push, because if people don't know your work exists, how do you expect them to consume it? Promoting your work isn't something you do once. It's a continuous process. Spending months, if not years, making something and then promoting it for a couple of weeks is a disservice not only to the art, but to yourself. Publicist Barbara Cave Hendricks urges authors to consider how long it took them to write their books and see them published, and to devote at least that much time to pushing them. That may sound like a lot of work, but here's the thing. You should want to promote your work for the same amount of time it took you to make it. If you're actually proud about what you've made, then you shouldn't have to be convinced to tell people about it.
I know a lot of people who make things who don't stand proudly by their stuff, whether they don't want to. It's something I'm noticing a lot with the generation of right under me is like, I don't know if they too cool or they don't want to look thirsty or they're not proud of their, but like they'll put a song out, they'll put it in their story, and that's it. You mean to tell me that you're gonna be passive with your own and just put it on your story once? Are you fucking crazy, bro? I'm still promoting my album that came out in June. It's a year out and I'm still out here like, call me if you get lost, like, right? And what I notice is that some of these, the younger guys and girls, they like, oh yeah, I got a song out, and they forget about it. And I'm like, no, let motherfuckers know. Tell people. When I first put the perfume out, dude, I had bags of the sample, just walking up to people like, hi, I'm Tyler, I made this, because I put time and love and too much energy into this finished project just to put it on Instagram and forget about it. Like, no, promote your, let people know, be proud of that you made.
Marketing isn't just about getting people to see your work, but influencing how they see your work. Getting people through the door is one thing, but you want them to go back out the door feeling better than when they walked in. How you market your art impacts how people experience it. The first time someone sees what you've made is when you promote it. That impression is carried with them when they finally sit down to consume it. If the trailer for your comedy film has all of the best bits in it, people are going to leave the theater dissatisfied. As an artist, you must treat marketing as a part of the craft because you are still curating the experience for your audience. Handing it off for someone else to do is like asking someone else to write the beginning of your story.
The story is not finished when you actually get it in the can, as they used to say. The story, the so-called marketing of the film, is a continuation of the storytelling. And the level of care and skill with which that's done really is important. You can't misdirect the audience that you're inviting into the story.
Once your art is out in the world, it no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the world. You have no control over how people experience and interpret your work. The meaning you have given your story is your subjective opinion and is not the reality for everyone. Your story, if told correctly, should function on multiple levels, allowing people to read it in different ways, even ways you hadn't foreseen. George Miller once visited South Africa, and people kept coming up to him to discuss the movie he made about the apartheid. If you look at his filmography, it doesn't appear that he's made anything about racial segregation in South Africa. The movie they were all referring to was Babe, a film Miller wrote and produced about a pig that wants to be a sheepdog. While he tried to explain that wasn't the intent, no one would listen. To them, Babe was a movie about apartheid.
You make stories, and you really don't know how they're going to be received. You don't. You put everything you know, all your skills and wisdoms, and you'll never master this process anyway. And you put it there, and then as we were talking about audience earlier, you really don't know what you have. Often it takes about 5 or 10 years, if it does impinge at all, to really understand what the story meant. And that's the key to this, that all narratives have to be in the eye of the beholder.
A story well told is allegorical. It places universal human experiences within an unfamiliar context, allowing the audience to relate it back to their own lived experience. Babe, while not intentionally about the apartheid, was about prejudice in a more general sense. But for people living in South Africa, their experience with prejudice was in the form of apartheid. So when they saw Babe and related it back to their own lives, that is what they saw. When your story is open to interpretation, you leave space for people to add their own meaning. They take what you've made and make it personal to them. Wanting people to see your story exactly how you see your story and take away exactly what you want them to take away is arrogant and a byproduct of your ego. When you write stories with your message on the surface, when you put the subtext front and center, people are unable to find their own meaning. And if they can't find their own meaning, your work will mean nothing to them. Your job isn't to tell people what to think, it's to tell them the best story you can and let the pieces fall where they may.
And he said, you realize now that this story no longer belongs to you guys, it belongs to everybody. And he's really referring to all the fan art and everything that was coming back. I said, Joseph Campbell had a marvelous quote from the Zanzibar Swahili storytellers who would say this when they finished a story. They'd say, the story has been told. If it was good, it belongs to everybody. If it was bad, it was my fault because I am the storyteller. And I realized that's the process.
While you need the audience to tell your story to, the audience also needs you to tell them stories. Stories help us make sense of the world. They present life's biggest problems in ways that we are detached from, allowing us to grapple with them in such a way that isn't directly related to our own lives. It is through this process that we are able to come to conclusions about the world around us and our meaning within it. Without stories, there is only madness.
I think we, all of us, every human being, and not those today, but across all time and space, we've been hardwired for stories. Stories are the way we make meaning of a very chaotic universe. We have to explain it to ourselves in a way that at least has some coherence and helps us make our way through the world.
The stories you tell can change the world by changing the people who change the world. But that cannot happen if the world does not see it. Your art doesn't make an impact if there's no one to make an impression on. Setting out with the expressed intention of only making something for yourself is counter to why we make things in the first place. Without the audience, your art means nothing. If you're going to tell a story, make it matter. Your duty as an artist is to confront the human condition, to grapple with life's unknowns, and distill them in a way that other people can understand. That is not something that should be taken lightly. A powerful story in the wrong hands can have disastrous consequences. You're dealing with something that has the ability to alter someone's life across space and time. Act like it.
And sometimes, and dare I say a lot of times, stories can also be dangerous. And I've always been aware that we should have a little label on our stories, hazardous material, because they can be.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe, and if you liked this video, you would love Season 4 of the Artwell podcast, where I share with you everything that I learned studying George Miller and interview his collaborators. You can find Season 4 of the Artwell podcast on Apple, Spotify, or at the link in the description.